Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today I want to take you on a wide-angle photo shoot, and I'll be using the Laowa 7.5mm f2 prime lens, fully manual. This is for a micro four thirds system, and if I put this lens on my camera, it actually makes my Lumix G9 look like a little piggy face. But before we dive into the photo session, I want to talk a little bit about the lens. This is a full metal body lens. It comes with a full metal body hood. The only problem that I have with this lens is that the lens hood and the lens cap actually don't play ball. If you have the lens hood screwed on, the lens cap just doesn't want to come off. And I do have little girly fingers, and I'm still having issues taking the lens cap off. So I usually use this lens without the lens hood. The problem, however, is the front element is protruding out and is this red frog eye coating, as they call it, and you might damage this without the lens hood. So it's kind of a, you know, givey. The lens has an aperture ring and it has a manual focusing ring. So the aperture is manual, so now I can actually show you the diaphragm opening and closing. The aperture goes from f2 to then f2.8, f4, f5.6, f8, f11, f16 and f22. With f22 the entrance pupil diameter is going to be about 0.35 millimeters, so it's really tiny, really sharp, but well, really in focus but not really sharp because of diffraction. At f2 you are going to experience a little bit about softening, edges, soft edges and vignetting and stuff. I don't really mind that because I usually vignette my images anyway, but I would recommend using this lens anywhere from f4 to f8, which is kind of the sweet spot. The focus ring is very smooth and it's about 90 degrees to turn it one way to the other, which is very cool if you're manually focusing a video. You don't have to, you know, turn this like crazy. So the closest focusing point is 12 centimeters and the furthest is infinity, and this is where people have issues with this lens because they say if they set the dial to infinity, the lens actually doesn't focus to infinity. Now, almost none of the lenses that have this dial focus to infinity, and there's two reasons for that. The first reason is if the lens is not manual, the camera actually needs to go beyond infinity and then come back to kind of find that sweet spot of a very distant focus point. With a manual lens is the same thing, so if you focus somewhere very far, you really need to go over that and then come back a little bit just to be sure that you're really focusing on the subject, which is really far away. So this is the reason why lenses have an overhead over infinity. The second reason is, of course, the temperature dilatation, because if you focus to infinity, if you set the dial fixed to infinity in Africa and then you go to Siberia, of course, everything changes due to temperature dilatation and the lens might actually not be able to even focus to infinity anyway. At least I think that's the second reason. Definitely useful to have like an overhead, and then you can really be sure that you're focused onto a subject which is really far away. Now the question is, can you use this lens for vlogging? Because it's not a stabilized lens, which means I'm gonna have to use only my in-body stabilization with the Lumix G9. So let's test this out right now. And this is it. This is the Laowa 7.5mm f2 lens on my Lumix G9, and as you can see, 110 degrees of field of view is really wide. It gives that kind of action cam look. I'm using an ND filter to stop the light from coming in because I'm trying to get as much as a blurred background as I can, and with an aperture of f2 you can see that it's not really blurry because the focal length is 7.5mm. If you divide that by 2 you get 3.75mm of an entrance pupil diameter, which doesn't mean it's going to be very shallow depth of field. Now if it was a 12mm entrance pupil diameter, you would get a really shallow depth of field. So let's go down to the gorge. I brought you guys to a gorge where we're going to take some wide angle shots of the pathways leading down and of the gorge, and I'll just, you know, vlog as we go along. Now for vlogging, it's not a big issue if you don't have an autofocus lens, because the distance from the camera to your face is always going to be relatively the same, and you don't have the lens hunting for focus if the autofocus is not the best on your camera. So I just set the focus distance to about half a meter and I'm pretty much always in focus. The other big issue, or the big issue that I have with this, is that the lens is not optically stabilized, which means that I'm only using the in-body stabilizer on my Lumix G9, and as you can see, it's doing a good job. It's not the best. It's not the same as if I use my Leica 12 to 60mm, where I have the dual IS, and you can see a little bit of wobbling on the edges as I walk, and that's usually the case if you're using the in-body stabilization and a wide-angle lens. wide-angle lenses is that you can use almost anything as a leading line composition. For instance, here I'm using these rails to take a photo of myself looking down at the gorge, and these rails here act as leading lines, and with wide-angle photography that's usually a very easy thing to do. I took a photo of that gorge and I can really show how deep that is because I'm using a wide-angle lens. Also, if you're an interior photographer, you can show off the whole room with just one shot, for instance, or if you're an architectural photographer, you can really emphasize the size and the shape of the buildings you're taking a photo of. Now this could be a cool composition with these stairs going down the hill. I think I can really emphasize the shape and the flow through the image by using a wide-angle lens. However, I am having difficulty using a tripod with this wide-angle lens. I find it much easier to just handhold the camera, find the angles and you know, the framings. I do prefer to use a tripod in my photography so that I can take time to frame the shot, think about the edges, you know, what things I want in the frame, what I don't want in the frame. And that's the challenge, isn't it, with wide-angle photography? You get so much stuff in the frame that they can actually be a distraction on the edges and just around the whole frame. And by eliminating that, you're actually eliminating the whole wide-angle field of view, the whole wide-angle feel of the shot. So yeah, I'm gonna have to work on this a little bit harder. One of the most powerful features of a wide-angle photography session is that you can add flow to your images. Now here I'm using this foreground element and I'm using these stairs leading down to the river underneath to kind of bridge the connection between the foreground and the background element. And this is where wide-angle photography becomes so cool and so powerful, this connection and this flow that you can add to your shots. Now we're going to go down to the gorge. I'm going to take some photos of the flowing water and really try to emphasize the perspective of what is a very tight place if you're here in person. The ultimate question is, was this lens worth the purchase? I think it was. I think it adds so much more creativity freedom to my photography, especially going into the wide-angle field of view photography. So if you're a landscape photographer thinking about buying a wide-angle lens for your micro four thirds, I think the Laowa 7.5mm is just the way to go. It's much cheaper than the Panasonic 7 to 14mm, which costs 900 euros. This one is 560, so it's cheaper. It is a manual lens, so you're gonna have to manually focus, but I usually always manual focus my photos. Makes me feel much more engaged in my photography, just like using manual settings. Now there is one more thing I want to try. I want to compare the wide-angle field of view from the Laowa to the OSMO ACTION. So this is the OSMO ACTION wide-angle field of view, which I usually use for wide-angle vlogging, and this is the Laowa 7.5mm. And I think I'm gonna switch to the Lumix G9 for vlogging from this day forth because it's kind of similar. It gets that really wide-angle shot, and the dynamic range, of course, is much better on the Lumix G9. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please feel free to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and I'll see you guys next time.